Good evening, everyone. Before I get started, you might even be able to hear. I can't speak very well. Can't breathe through my nose. I've got a little bit of a cold, so if I seem a little bit out of it, that's why. That's what I get for playing with my niece and nephew who are sick for 2 days and playing with them and cuddling with them, and so it's not a surprise. So this week we are going to be pretty much picking up where we left off with Matthew last week. So what we're going to be reading today is what Jesus told his disciples just after relating to them the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes that we read last week. And this is a parable. Jesus uses a variety of methods to teach, just like any good teacher today. He told stories, he explained metaphors and used metaphors, quoted familiar scriptures, and we'd have discussion, and he would lead from personal example, last but not least, certainly. And today we're going to read one of Jesus's parables. And a parable is a story that uses metaphors, and Jesus often used this as a teaching tool. It was a great teaching tool for the time because they didn't have textbooks then, right? And often not even scrolls as a way of passing on information. And Jesus's followers could understand the plain language that related to things in their everyday lives when he used these metaphors. So here is Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. Actually, I'm not going to go through 20. I think it's about through 17 that I'm going to read. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people have a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on the top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, you let your life shine before people so they can see the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven. So these are metaphors he uses here, right? So metaphors, when you talk about one thing, is representing another. And Jesus here is talking about using the metaphors of salt and light as relating to us as people. So think about this metaphor of light. You are the light of the world. And don't hide it. Don't put it under a basket. Put it out where it can light up the world. So light is used to help us see, to help illuminate objects. And it's also used to help grow. It helps plants grow, it helps us grow, and to heal. By calling his people the light of the world, Jesus was trying to teach his disciples about what it means to be a disciple and to be like light by illuminating God's way. And also by shining your own light and not hiding. Don't put, if you have great things, everyone has great things to say, great things to do, and don't hide that, but instead put it out there for all to see. So that's all I'm going to say about light. I'm going to say a little bit more salt, but I want you to think about how you as individuals can be light for other people. And this is something for you to ponder on and think about after this video is over. But I do want to say more about salt. So the other metaphor that Jesus uses here is you are the salt of the earth. What does that mean? So let's talk a little bit about salt first. It does come from the earth. It comes from dry lake beds and salt flats. It also comes from the ocean. And it also comes from salt mines. In some mines, people go underground to chop it out of the earth. And in others, a well is dug and fresh water is forced down into the salt deposit. And when it comes back up, it's salty. And then the water can be evaporated to take out the salt. Most kosher salt is sea salt, and much of our table salt comes from wells that force water into the ancient ocean salt deposits, like the second way I described. And salt has a huge and important history. In China, the history of salt can be traced back over 6,000 years. Salt was such a valuable thing that battles were fought over it, or fought over control for the areas where there were salt flats. Now, maybe you've seen that pink salt, that pink chunky salt, the Himalayan salt. Himalayan rock salt was first laid down more than 500 million years ago in the earth. And today, a salt mine in Pakistan is the second largest salt mine in the world. And that was one that's famous for producing that Himalayan pink rock salts that you sometimes see. In Europe, in Salzburg, is a city in Austria, and I had never put this together before. It means salt city, city of salt, Salzburg. It seems sort of obvious when I say it now, but I'd never thought of that. And I think of Salzburg, I think of Mozart personally as a musician. I never would think of salt when I think of Salzburg, but in fact, it was also a very important center of the salt trade in ancient Europe. And today there is a salt mine near Salzburg that's still open, and it's considered the world's oldest operating salt mine. Pretty cool. And in relatively more recent times, salt production also played a significant role in early America. The Massachusetts Bay Colony held the first patent to produce salt in the colonies and continued to do so for 200 years. And the Erie Canal was opened primarily to make transportation of salt easier. So it's at a pretty important place in our history. And you think of salt today and how we use it. One of its earliest uses was to preserve food, which not only did it enable food to last longer, but because food could last longer, it could be transported, which meant the preservation of food and salt enabled people to travel in ways they hadn't before. And that allowed them to find more food, but it also allowed them to visit someone else, to be able to buy and sell food in distant places, or maybe to buy and sell pottery or grain or animals. So salt really helped enable travel and trade in the past. So salt had a really important role in our history in its function of preventing decay. And traditionally, this aspect of salt as preventing decay has been the focus of the meaning of this scripture here. That what Jesus means is that people who followed him could be a force to prevent moral decay, just like salt prevents the decay of food, that we can prevent moral decay in other people. But there's other meanings here that could go deeper. So in a sense, we as people come from the sea, where the earth is made up of, well, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but a large percent, like more than the majority of the earth is salt water. And the same thing with our bodies are very much made up of salt. There's salt in our blood and our sweat and our tears, of course. And if your body salt gets out of balance, you're in real trouble. It can be a problem for runners, that runners have to drink a lot of water to stay hydrated. But if they drink too much water, their body gets off kilter and their salt levels is too low because of all the water they've drunk. And they can get really sick and possibly even die. So salt is, you got to have enough of it. It's important. Another thing salt does is it flavors food, right? Let's not forget that. So your tongue has salt receptors along its side, and they're really close to the bitterness receptors. So sometimes you can put salt in something bitter, like grapefruit, and it occupies those taste buds so that it cuts out the bitterness of the taste buds really close by, which is pretty cool. And of course, it just adds flavor to everything you add it to. I'm not someone who actually enjoys like salty things and salt on things. But boy, if I make a loaf of bread without salt and I forget the salt, which I did once, it tasted horrible. It had no flavor. When I eat bread, I don't taste salt, but it enhances the flavor of other things. Even cookies, if you've ever baked cookies, the recipe probably called for salt, and that's because the salt helps bring out the sweetness and all the flavors of the cookie all the more. So salt has all these roles, and all of them, I think, can relate to how us as people, if we are the salt of the earth, can act in our lives. So number one, salt is a a force against decay and prevents decay. So we can do that too. And we can help be a force against the moral decay in ourselves and for those around us. And salt is also really elemental and important as a part of the earth. And it is for us as well. And we are fundamentally tied to and a part of the earth and its system. So we are part of that. We are the salt of the earth. We are part of this ecosystem that we call earth. And thirdly, talked about salt as an intensifier. So it brings out the best in the foods we eat, right? So same, we can do the same in our own lives by bringing out the best in the people around us. Because you ever noticed, like if you treat someone a certain way, like if you're that nice to them, it might bring out their bad side. But if you're kind to them and help them, then it can bring out the best in them. So just like salt can bring out flavors in the food, we can bring out the flavors in the people around us. So that's all for today, all about salt and a little bit about light, but I didn't go into a lot about the "you are the light of the world" part of the scripture, because remember, I want you to think more about that yourselves and what you think that means to be the light of the world, what that means to you. So I will see you next week.